Welcome to this episode of Safe Home Podcast for struggling teens and their families finding their healing path. I'm Beth Syverson, a mom of an 18-year-old son, Joey, who's been dealing with addiction and mental health issues for several years. I'm walking beside him as he struggles with his recovery while I work on my own personal growth and healing. Today's guest is Nicole Miller, a certified drug and alcohol counselor and coach from Oregon who teaches addiction pharmacology at Portland Community College. I heard Nicole on Heather Ross's podcast, Living with Addiction, and even though she's very knowledgeable about all kinds of drugs, I brought her in today to help us focus on fentanyl. It's such a dangerous drug, and deaths from fentanyl poisoning have skyrocketed in just the last 2 or 3 years. Our family really wants to raise awareness around fentanyl, so Nicole will help us all understand the risks and what we can all do to prevent deaths caused by fentanyl. So welcome to Safe Home, Nicole.
Hi, thanks for having me.
As we were hopping on, we realized that today, August 31st, the day we're recording this, is Overdose Awareness Day. Mm-hmm. International, I think. International Overdose Awareness Day. And it seems like maybe fitting that we're honoring that day somehow by creating this recording to help other people understand the dangers of overdose from fentanyl and other things too. So, and we here at Safe Home want to dedicate this episode in memory of Helanna Johnson, who is our life coach, Heather Ross's daughter, who tragically died last December from a fentanyl overdose. We want Helanna's legacy to be that we educate and inform parents and families and the communities about the dangers of this horrible, horrible scourge on our society. So please help spread the word in honor of Helanna.
Yeah.
So Nicole, thank you for your work in this field. It's so important.
Thank you.
To train people to do what you're doing and to help everybody understand. So I wonder, is your interest in this area personally relevant, or is it more just science-based and you like to teach and learn new things, or is there some sort of personal journey you'd like to share?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely personal. So I'm a person in long-term recovery. So I've been in recovery myself for about 16 years. Yeah. Since 2006,
Wow.
like whatever that math turns out to be.
Wow.
And so I struggled with addiction for a long time, and I'm fortunate to have, been able to get clean and sober and stay that way for all this time. And then since then, I have, many family members who have been involved in addiction, many of them clean now, but, I also lost my brother to an overdose in 2013.
Oh, wow. I'm so sorry.
And so, this is all very near and dear to my heart. And it's something I have so much passion for, because I know that, one, people can recover. And I also know that there are things that we can do to keep people safe, even if they're not in a place, where recovery is maybe their goal. So, I think that all of that is just so important.
Yes. We are all about harm reduction over here at Safe Home and in our family. Our son is still using substances, primarily, we think, just quote unquote cannabis, but it is disabling to him the amount he uses. So I don't just say just cannabis, like a lot of people will just say, oh, he's just using weed. No, it's debilitating. But we talk to him all the time about how to be safer. Luckily, he's 18 now, so he can get it from the dispensary here in California. I know some states don't have that, but we are dedicated to helping people understand harm reduction. And it's not just sobriety that we're seeking for our loved ones. It's just keeping them alive. Keeping them alive is super, super, super important. So, Oh gosh. Well, it sounds like you've kind of been through the ringer yourself and understand the whole process backwards and forwards, probably more than you really wished you knew, huh?
Yeah. It's, the knowledge comes in handy, but, I'm sure that there's some of it I could have done without over the years.
Yes. So much pain and struggle. Oh gosh. Well, I'm really glad that you're so stable now for many years, and that you're turning that experience into helping other people. So thank you. Thank you for being on here. And what is the deal with this drug? Why I've seen these charts and it's skyrocketed, like the line graph, it goes the last 2 years. What the heck is going on?
Really bad. So, so I think we should start with just like, what is fentanyl? And so fentanyl is an opiate. It's a short-acting, high-potency opiate. So in terms of potency, it is about 50 times stronger than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine. So it's extremely potent. And when we think of fentanyl, there's two different things. So there's pharmaceutical fentanyl, which is what, if you're in the hospital and there's some need that they would give you. And then there is non-pharmaceutical or like street made fentanyl. And so when we're looking at all these overdoses and things that are happening, we're looking at street fentanyl, not necessarily pharmaceutical fentanyl.
Okay. Because I hear it in like hospital shows and on the news. I'm like, what? They're giving people fentanyl? What in the heck? I thought fentanyl killed people. So it's all about the dosage?
Yes. So, in pharmaceutical fentanyl, they can give predictable dosage and manage it in that way. The problem with the non-pharmaceutical fentanyl is that there is all of these different, they call them like analogs, all these different varieties of it that range in potency. There's one of them at a fatal dose is invisible to the naked eye. Like you can't even see the amount that would be enough to be a fatal dose.
Whoa.
And the reason that we're seeing so much of this is it's cheap and it's easy to get. And dealers and, street chemists and all the people doing this, they're able to put it into things, in some cases, other opiate drugs to make it go further, or they can even put it in things like MDMA or methamphetamine or, cocaine. And so they can lace it into these things and people don't know that it's there.
Why would they want to lace it? Aren't they killing off their customers? Seems like not a wise business practice.
Right.
What are they doing?
To make sense. In some cases to make it go further, I think would be part of it. Okay. And then when it's higher potency and shorter acting, there's more addictive potential.
Yeah. So you get them more hooked because it's like a quick hit, very, very strong hit, kind of like DMT probably in the psychedelic world. It's like, boom. And then you're out and then you need more. So then you have to go to your dealer and buy some more. Yeah. And is fentanyl cheaper to make than other things? Is that part of it?
Yeah.
Is it a money thing?
Yeah. So it's definitely cheap. And there's, all sorts of chemicals that they can get a hold of. And the tricky part is, depending on like where it's at in the supply chain, the people selling it on the streets might not even know that it's in there.
Wow, that is so terrifying. And it's hard for me to even imagine the people who are in some lab somewhere in their basement, or I don't know where these people make stuff, but what is going through their heads? I guess it's just greed or needing to continue this process and keep people hooked. Is that what it is? God, it's just so hard to even understand.
Yeah, I would think all of that, right? I think when you're in the business of selling drugs and selling things that can kill people. I mean, I think it's just how do we make more and sell more? Yeah.
And Heather, whose show you were on, her daughter accidentally died from fentanyl overdose. And I think she had 4 times the lethal dose of fentanyl. And she had no idea it was in the heroin she was snorting. And she wasn't trying to kill herself. She wasn't trying to overdose with heroin at all. She was just trying to take a little just to, and it was so tragic. So people don't know it's in their drugs. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. It doesn't look any different. You have no idea. And it can be in pills. What forms can it be?
Yeah, it can be in pills. A lot of times it's in powder form. So they can mix it when they're creating pills. It can get mixed into drugs that come in powder form. So cocaine, methamphetamine, MDMA pills, any of that stuff it can get mixed into.
Can it get into any cannabis product?
I've heard of people ending up with fentanyl laced marijuana. I don't know like how common it is. But if it's powder form, I would imagine that you can dust it onto that. So
yeah. Or could it be maybe just the cannabis was nearby the people making other stuff with it? Is it possible that it could just travel or get cross-contaminated?
That's a good question. And I don't know like 100%. I mean, I think that because you think like, even if there is, say if there's a bag that has some drugs in it and the inside of the bag had like a fentanyl residue, that could present some risk depending on how much residue, depending on what type it is and the potency of it.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's this airborne thing that could just float through the air and land on the weed.
Okay.
You know,
What I tell Joey is we just don't know.
yeah.
We don't know what it could be in. So let's just
Yes.
be safe.
Mhm.
So what I did for Joey is I gave him a box of 2 canisters of Narcan or Naloxone. It's a generic. Is that the right thing to do? Is that what we should be doing with anyone that's might be around any sort of substances?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that if people are actively using substances, having something like Narcan in their possession. I also think sending the message to not be using alone.
Aha. Yes.
You know, because when somebody's using alone, if an overdose happens, even the Narcan isn't going to do any good because they're not going to be able to administer it. So, you know, having Narcan, not using alone, having their friends or whoever they're with know to call 911 because I think there's a lot of hesitation, obviously, right? People don't want to call 911 because they're afraid, right, of consequences. And then there's also fentanyl test strips.
Yes, I gave those to him too. So they test the substance, not themselves, right? The substance that they're going to use.
Yeah, they test the substance. And to use those, whatever substance it is, has to be able to be turned into liquid form.
Okay.
And then you dip the test strip in there and it can detect whether or not there's fentanyl in there. What it doesn't do is it doesn't speak to the amount or the potency of it. And there is also, they call it like the chocolate chip phenomenon, in that, like, you think about how, like, with chocolate chip cookies, right? The chocolate chips are never spread evenly. So the same thing, you know, with fentanyl is that depending on what part of the bag you got the sample or, you know, any of that could influence the particular thing that you're testing. So, you know, best practice is to test the whole amount of whatever drugs it is somebody's going to use, is to test all of it. But if for whatever reason that's not possible, then at least testing a portion of it to know what you're getting.
Is there somewhere along the line, I heard there's places where you can drop off substances somewhat anonymously and they can tell you if it's pure or safe-ish. I don't know. Safe.
Yeah, I think that depends on the state because it's going to kind of depend on the laws that are in the state.
Yeah. Maybe Oregon and California may be more likely.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I have heard of some states having actual places that will do testing as well.
People probably would not want to do that because how do they know whoever you're handing these substances to won't turn you in? And, you know, so the whole illegality of it is once again a huge obstacle, right?
Yeah.
Now, I've heard of people taking fentanyl on purpose, like being addicted to fentanyl and they take it on purpose. How do they do that without killing themselves every single time? It's just dosage?
Yeah, I mean,
so scary to think.
It is. But yeah, there are definitely people who that is their drug of choice. And there's always that inherent risk that they don't know what they're getting. I think one of the big things that might be on the side of those people, and it kind of sounds funny to say it that way, is tolerance.
Yeah.
Is because if they're using this higher potency opiate, they're going to develop tolerance that's in line with that. I think where it gets really risky is if you have someone who's using heroin and they have a tolerance to whatever amount of heroin that they're using, and then something like fentanyl comes along and it's so much more potent, then that is enough to surpass even what their tolerance is.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know I understand heroin makes people feel very warm and peaceful. Does fentanyl do the same thing, but just it doesn't last as long? Or is it more powerful?
Yeah. So fentanyl is an opiate. So it's going to have very similar effects to any other opiate drug, whether it's heroin or Oxycontin, oxycodone, anything that falls into that category of drugs. And yeah, it wears off faster. So it's a shorter acting one. So heroin is like, 4 to 6 hours, roughly, kind of give or take. So fentanyl is typically shorter than that. So what that means is that if somebody uses fentanyl exclusively as their drug of choice, they're using, but the period of time between when they use and when they start coming down and going into withdrawal is shorter. So that just means that they need to use more often to stay out of withdrawal.
Oh, it just increases the risk every single time you use it, right? Yeah. And is fentanyl cheaper on the street, like plain old fentanyl, if you wanted to buy it?
I've heard that it is.
But it probably ends up about the same if you have to use more of it more often.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Oh, my goodness. Now, I understand that fentanyl in our drug system is so terrible right now because kids that are not heroin addicts, or people, not just kids, people who are not heroin addicts or not addicted to any substance, but just try some pill that some friend gave them at a party that is laced with fentanyl and then they die.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just terrifying and so tragic if you've got someone that's not even in the drug system at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just happen to get that pill that was laced that they had no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, there's tragedy all around, but that one seems particularly like shocking and just so tragic. Yeah. What are we supposed to tell our kids? What are we supposed to tell our kids in this climate right now? I mean, you can't just tell them, don't ever do it, because then they for sure will do it. Right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, honestly, I think it's really just keeping the conversation open with them about what kind of things come up when you're out in those environments and, and letting them know about the risks. Of course, you're right that just saying don't do it isn't effective, right? Like if that was effective, like we
learned that from Just Say No. Yeah.
But I think just having those open conversations and just, hey, like I know that this is a reality that you maybe go to parties or you go to places and things are offered. And I think it's important that you recognize some of the risk with that and just talking about that and having the door open, I think, for them to share their experience with us as parents.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure these kids are scared, although their risk tolerance is much greater than ours, but I'm sure it's scary out there. Good night. I mean, when we were kids, I mean, I think I'm older than you, but when I was a kid, God, the scariest thing was, I don't know, getting drunk or something. It was just like, I don't know. There's nothing like this hanging over our heads. It's just horrible. Now, I told you I gave Joey Narcan. And by the way, it was impossible to get it, or not impossible because I got it, but really hard. I had to go to 4 pharmacies because you can get it from any pharmacy, or supposedly any pharmacy, without a prescription. The pharmacist actually writes the prescription. Is that your understanding of this, Nicole? That's what happened to me. There's some paper that the pharmacist had to sign.
Yeah.
But you don't need a doctor's prescription.
Right.
But I went to 4 pharmacies because the first 3 did not have it in stock. I was just incredulous. I'm like, you're kidding me.
Yeah.
You're kidding me. This drug, Narcan or Naloxone, can reverse an opioid overdose. It can bring someone back to life. I think they call it the Lazarus drug, right? Because it brings people back to life.
Yeah.
And you're saying that it's out of stock? It seems like that should never be out of stock in any pharmacy. Am I crazy? What is going on with us?
I agree. I mean, I agree that it should be in stock because, the things that we have on hand to save lives are only effective if we can get them.
Exactly. And the way people looked at me when the pharmacy clerk, when I said, I would like to get some Narcan for my son. Do you have Narcan? And the way they looked at me, it would have been very easy for me to just say, fuck it, I'm not doing this again.
Yeah.
They looked at me like I was asking for some illicit something or other.
Like you were asking for fentanyl. Right?
Exactly. I'm like, I am trying to save my kid's life. I'm trying to do the right thing. Can you help me out here? And they're like, no, sorry, we don't carry that. And I'm in Orange County, California, which is just, they are just lying to themselves to think that there's not a problem here. I don't know statistics, but it's like white suburbia, and they're like, "Oh no, we don't carry that here." That was kind of the vibe I was getting. So I had to go to 4 pharmacies, and so I finally got it. I gave it to Joy, and I was pretty scared because I thought he would be, thinking that I thought he was using opiates, or I thought he would think it would be like a put down. But I explained it to him, and it was shortly after Heather's daughter died. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do just whatever I can to help make sure my son doesn't overdose on fentanyl. But I gave it to him, and he said, gosh, Mom, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate it because you don't want me to die. And I get that. And I said, make sure your friends know where it is. Because like you said, it doesn't help the person by themselves. You have to have somebody else giving it to you. So they have to know where it is. So I said, I want you to make sure your friends know where it is.
Yeah.
Make sure your dad knows where it is. Make sure, and take it with you. The other day I took him to some sort of music festival and I picked him up and I said, hey, do you have your Narcan with you? Just throw it in your backpack. And he goes, oh, I don't have it with me, but I don't know these people I'm going to be with. And it's a music festival, so it's very possible there could be drugs there. So I guess I will go get it, Mom. Thanks. Yeah. And so he did. He threw it in his backpack. I don't think he needed it. And I'm glad that he didn't need it, but I'd much rather have it with him.
Yeah.
And, I said, maybe you can save somebody else. I just think in the circles he runs with, I think he should just carry it with him. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Because the reality is you just don't know when you're going to need it. And it's one of those things. It's just like having a life jacket or having a fire extinguisher, right? Like you hope to never need it.
Yes.
But you're really going to regret it if you need it and you don't have it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that probably that same kind of fear comes up for a lot of parents or a lot of people with loved ones who are struggling with addiction is if we, try to give them things like Narcan or, whatever else that they might take it personally or that it'll be received negatively. And, the reality is it's just meeting people where they're at. It's that acknowledgement of, okay, abstinence is maybe not what you're going for right now. And I recognize like this is where you're at. And I love you. So I'm going to, empower you to be safer in doing it.
Yes.
And I mean, to me, it's just such an act of love and acceptance. Right. And it's not saying, hey, cool, I'm cool with this. It's just saying, hey, I realize that this is a reality. Because the other option is we do kind of that old school pushing people away, like all the shit that just pushes them away, right? Don't do it. Don't talk to me about it. Don't ever let me see it.
Yeah. Let me know when you're sober. Yeah.
Yeah. And that just perpetuates it, right? Like we want our children and our loved ones to feel safe and to be able to come to us with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to reduce shame around it as much as possible. And like you said, just meet him where he's at. Yeah. Meet him where he's at today. Today, he's not interested in being sober. Not interested. He's like, no, Mom, I have nothing that does what this cannabis does for me right now. Sorry. Yeah. It's just not happening right now. I don't have enough tools right now to let go of this. And so I understand. I mean, this kid is in an immense amount of pain. He's trying to figure stuff out. He's 18, but his brain is more like 14 or 13 from when he started using substances. And he's just not at that place where he can do it yet. And I understand. And it's not, it's not what I dreamed of for him at all. Yeah. I'm sure for himself either. It's not where he wanted to be. He wanted to be playing for the Dodgers at this point. Right. But, but we can't just live in where we wish things were. We have to look at what is. And right now he's using a gigantic amount of cannabis. And I'm sure he's exposed to a lot of other stuff when he goes out with his friends. So I think it's really important. And that's why I want to talk about this stuff. And Joey wants us to talk about it too, by the way, in case anyone ever wonders. I every once in a while, every couple of weeks, I check in with Joey and say, you still fine with everything on the pod? Yeah. Because yep, I want people to know. I want people to understand. I want people to know that we're not trying to make you guys crazy and we're not trying to be fuck ups. We're just hurting. Yeah. And we need some compassion. So, yeah,
that's one thing that in all the time that I've been doing this work and, all the people I've worked with and like even for myself, as I think about that nobody when they're like 6 years old is like, you know what I really want? I want to grow up and be like a strung out addict. That's it. Yeah. That's my goal. Yeah.
Nobody,
nobody's, that's nobody's goal. And so, and I think like recognizing that is that, yes, behaviors and things that happen within an addiction are impactful, but it's really never personal. Like it's not a personal attack.
No. Yeah. It can feel that way though. I totally get it. It can feel that way, but that tends to be pointing to areas that the parents can work on themselves. It's not even really anything about your kid. If you're feeling completely broken over it, that's probably stuff that the parent can go look at their own life. What's that triggering for you? What expectations or perceptions do you have about what this family life would be that you need to reexamine, that kind of thing. So therapy for all. Yeah. Everybody gets therapy. And can you describe what does Narcan do? Why is it such a miracle drug? Why are we able to administer it without being a paramedic or something? What is it? How is it so magical?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the way that it works is it goes into the brain. So in our brain and our body, we have receptors for opiates. So we have receptors for a lot of things, but specifically we have opiate receptors. And when a drug like fentanyl or heroin or any of the other opiates that are like getting people high, when they're in the system, they get on those receptors in the brain and they activate them, they turn them on. So what Narcan does is it comes in and it effectively kicks those other opiates off the receptors and gets on them itself. And so it's blocking these full activators from getting to the receptors. And so it just kicks them off and makes it so they can't get back on.
Okay. And it doesn't touch any other parts of the brain. It just goes right to the opioid receptors.
Goes right to the opiate receptors.
It doesn't have any other like bad side effects. Like you don't have to be careful. It will hurt some other part of your body. It just goes to those opiate receptors and turns it off.
Yep.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Well, so it kicks the opiates off of it. Uh-huh. And the reason it does that is so when we talk about, so in our brain, we have neurotransmitters, right? These are chemical messengers in our brain. And the reason that all psychoactive drugs, so whether it's heroin, meth, marijuana, whatever it is, the reason that they have the effects that they do is because they look just like our own naturally occurring neurotransmitters. So if you think about the neurotransmitter being the key and the receptor being the lock, drugs of abuse are the key that fits into that lock. So the interesting thing is that drugs don't do anything in our brain that our brain isn't already capable of on its own. It's just like on a way bigger scale.
I've never thought of it that way. So everything, like for instance, the heroin we talked about gives you that warm, fuzzy, loving feeling. We have that ability to do in our own brain, but perhaps somebody has had trauma or abuse or had whatever obstacles in their life and aren't able to, especially at that intensity.
Right.
And so it feels so much better coming from heroin. Or you're even able to access it at all with heroin, where otherwise maybe you can't even find that. Is that kind of close?
Yeah. And so, the interesting thing with opiates is because they work in our opioid system, which is our pain relief system. So, what happens when there's physical pain or even emotional pain, right? When a pain thing happens, our brain turns on and it releases our own natural endorphins to go and deal with that pain. And that's why if you stub your toe, like it hurts like hell for a minute, but then it starts to dissipate. That's your brain and your body's built-in pain management system. And it does the same with like emotional pain. So opiates come in, they do that same thing, but they do it on a bigger scale. And so, a lot of people who use opiates just report feeling numb. They're in this state of euphoria, but emotionally, it's just numbness.
Okay. But they're not in pain though.
And they're not in pain. Yeah.
So numbness is better than pain. So
the irony is that in the long run, opiates are worse for pain. So you think about like people with chronic pain being treated with opiates in the long term. In the long term, they end up with more pain than before they started using the opiates for it.
And they have to keep upping the opiates and keep finding more doctors that will prescribe them. And that's where this whole cycle starts. Because you get a tolerance from it?
Yep.
Like cannabis?
Yeah.
Oh,
exactly.
gosh. And then after a while, it just won't even cut the pain? Is that what you're saying? Shoot.
Yeah. So there's with opiates, there's no limit to the amount of tolerance that can develop. So it really is just the scenario where you have to keep taking more and more and more to get that same effect, right? So, if we say it's in milligrams, and I don't know, it's not always measured that way, but it works. Maybe on day 1, 10 milligrams was effective in relieving X amount of pain. On day 50, you need 100 milligrams to get the same effect that you got from 10 on day 1.
You can just see how this would just create a cycle that just would seem impossible to get out of. But people do get out of it. How do they get out of it? It's kind of miraculous if people can get out of that.
Yeah, and people do. And I think, in all of this, I think it's important to realize there is hope and there is recovery and people do get there. It's a lot of work in terms of counseling and treatment. For people who are using opiates, medication-assisted treatment is one of the biggest components.
Yeah, so MAT.
Yeah, MAT.
Yeah. So some people think that is just keeping people addicted. Can you address that issue real quick?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest misconceptions about MAT. So the reality is, so if we look at abstinence-based treatment models versus medication-assisted treatment models, in abstinence-based treatment models, opiate-dependent individuals drop out within 72 days, most of them. So, the rates of treatment dropout are astronomical because the withdrawal that they're dealing with, they can't get stable.
Yeah.
So the best outcomes for opiate-dependent individuals are in MAT on a stable dose for longer periods of time. And when we think about what is recovery, right? Recovery is I have built a life that allows me to remain clean and sober, right? I was able to get a job and get my kids back. And I, have hobbies and shit that I like to do. And, and
something to wake up for in the morning. Yeah.
Meaningful relationships, all of that stuff. MAT allows people to do those things.
Yeah.
To build those things. And yes, it's true that they're taking medication that they are dependent on, meaning if they stop taking it, they're going to experience withdrawal. That is true. What that medication is doing is stabilizing their brain chemistry, allowing them to not be experiencing, debilitating withdrawal symptoms.
I've heard they're the worst. Oh, it's horrible.
And, and for opiate dependent people, it can go on for a long, long time. So it allows them to be out of withdrawal, to deal with the cravings, and to be able to tend to all of those things in their lives. So really it's an absolute life-saving modality.
Yes.
And we need it. And to say that, and it's really like old school thinking to say like, oh, you're just switching one thing for another and you're just addicted. And, I like to think about it like someone who has diabetes. They're dependent on insulin to be able to be healthy and to live their life. People who take mental health medications, right? People take mental health medications to balance their brain chemistry, to allow them to function.
Yeah. I was going to say, if I quit my antidepressant right now, I would feel probably suicidal if I cut it cold turkey. So I'm addicted to my antidepressant? I guess so. Because if I were to get off, I'd have to slow it down gradually with my doctor. So if you're not supposed to be addicted to any medicine, well, then we should not take anything. No one should take anything. So that's sort of, there's such a double standard. We would never tell somebody with any sort of other kind of medical condition, no, you can't have that because you'll get hooked on it. Well, criminy. So I'm very much for MAT, and I'm trying to help people understand what that is. Because I think a lot of people, maybe they are not in this world at all, and they think, oh my God, they're giving people drugs to get off of drugs. That doesn't sound right. And I understand that getting off of opiates is like the worst side effects. It sounds just horrible. Were you involved with opiates at all? I can't remember what.
No, my primary drug of choice had been meth and other stimulants. I had done some opiates, and who knows, like had I continued on and not gotten sober when I did, the potential was there.
But you didn't have to cut off of opiates at any point. It sounds absolutely horrible.
Yeah, the physical withdrawal symptoms. Things like meth and cocaine, there's a lot of like psychological withdrawal, a lot of like cravings and fatigue, and it's definitely not fun. But opiate withdrawals are intensely physical. You think about like the worst flu that you've ever had and multiply it by like some huge number. And, and it drags on. You might get through that acute phase, but even weeks and months after becoming abstinent, people are still experiencing these symptoms. Yeah. And you couple that with, one of the big things with opiate dependence is this really kind of low tolerance for stress and discomfort and pain.
Yes.
And those two things together are not a good recipe. Just go ahead and quit and just figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. The people that are using opiates are probably not the ones that have that ability to tolerate a lot of stress or obstacles. Yeah. That's why they're using the opiates, because whatever trauma or whatever is going on, they couldn't manage it. And so they use the substances. And so expecting them to get off of it without any problems, like, oh my goodness, it needs so much support and so much understanding and empathy and compassion. It's just, it makes me pretty sad the way we treat people around that. Those people need the most empathy. And yet a lot of times they're just sort of thrown away. But, they're just so far gone. So I think our culture has a lot to do in that regard, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, coming back to the Narcan, how do we know it's time to give somebody Narcan? When is that time to get that out of the box?
Yeah, good question. So signs of an opiate overdose, so labored breathing, so it's a depressant. So breathing slows down, loss of consciousness, slowed pulse or heart rate. So if you're seeing somebody, that is kind of like falling out, you're unable to wake them, if they seem like they're having trouble breathing, really kind of like that loss of consciousness and not responsive, then, definitely.
Could it look like they're dead and you might think they're dead and you just try giving them Narcan and they might come back if it hasn't been too long?
Yeah. Yeah. The short answer is yes. Like if you have the Narcan, give the Narcan.
Just try it. Just try it.
Call 911.
Yeah.
And also the recognition, especially with things like fentanyl, is that it might take more than one dose of Narcan.
Yes. I understand that sometimes even more than two, depending. But I think Narcan comes in 2 bottles, right? It comes together with 2.
Yeah.
Those that I bought, it got 2 bottles in a box. So that's why. So how do you know if you need to do another one?
If they're not coming out of it.
Just keep going.
Yeah. Just based on what you're seeing. Like if they're still showing the same symptoms and don't seem to be becoming more alert, then give the other one. But again, I think the biggest thing is like if you're administering Narcan, you need to be calling 911 to be getting trained medical professionals. But yeah, like unless the person is alert and responsive, then we should be giving more.
Another one. Yeah. And any emergency personnel will have Narcan on them, right?
I hope so.
They always, they should.
They should.
They better. My mother used to work in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, and they would give Narcan all the time to little babies. So she's like, Narcan babies whose mothers were drug users. So I don't know who figured this out, but it's kind of an amazing thing. And then, so what if the person is unconscious because they had a heart attack and it's not opioid related at all, and you give them Narcan, that still is okay, right? I mean, it won't hurt their other situation.
Yeah, I'm not a full doctor, so I don't want to say for like 100% sure, but yeah, I wouldn't think that would do.
But even if you mess it up, you can't hurt somebody with it, is what I understand.
Right.
But you're going to have the 911 people coming right after you anyway. But I just want to empower people to use this amazing medicine to help, because especially with the fentanyl on board, it could happen, and we want to make sure people are prepared. Okay, so we have the Narcan and we have the fentanyl test strips. Is there anything else that we can understand or know or help our kids know to avoid fentanyl poisoning?
I mean, I think at this point, just with the state of how things are, I mean, I think just the recognition that it could be in anything, and it doesn't matter how much you trust the person you're getting it from, because that person doesn't necessarily know where it came from and what happened along the way, because I think, especially for like teens and stuff, the thought is like, well, it's my friend, and my friend would never give me something that's bad.
Right.
So I just think like recognizing that, yes, that can be true. Like your friend would never give you something that's bad, but your friend also doesn't know.
Yeah, because your friend's not the only person that's ever touched this stuff. How many hands do these street drugs pass through? I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a lot.
Chemist person who makes it, and then the person who sells it to the drug dealers, and the I don't know. It could be any number of people, and you have no idea where in the world they came from. So we just don't know. And that's just a big thing to understand. Yeah. I think that nobody is really trying to kill people. Well, maybe they are, but why would they try to kill people? Because then that's their customer. They just tried to kill. But so I think people are just trying to make money and trying to make their drugs go further and cutting them with things to make them last longer or whatever. Oh, it's such a crazy, crazy world. How do you stay sane dealing with this every day in your world? I mean, you're training people, you're helping people who are addicted. How do you stay centered and grounded with all this death and destruction around you?
Yeah. I mean, I think a big part of it is getting my own therapy, my own counseling, having my own support network of people in my life who I can talk to, and who also do this work, and we can support one another and not carry these things, because it can be so much to carry, so much. And then just really taking care of myself. So, fitness is a big part of my life, my family, and really, looking at my life today with so much gratitude. I'm so happy that I get to do this work and hopefully save other people's lives. And then I'm just immensely grateful for the recovery that I have, because I couldn't imagine. Fentanyl it was not a thing when I was using. Of course, there was things that were laced, but it wasn't the reality of what it is now. Oh my God. Like I wouldn't have lived 30 seconds. It's so scary. So
it's a terrible time. That's for sure. And you do private coaching. Is it like when people are right at the start of recovery and they need that kind of acute help, or is it more long-term, or what does yours look like?
Yeah, so it kind of varies. So I do a lot of work with families and individuals. And so a lot of times it might be like families are calling up like, hey, I have my child or my spouse and they're struggling with addiction. And so, helping the individual, but then also doing that work with the family, because I think it's so important, because addiction doesn't just impact the individual.
Absolutely.
It impacts the whole system. Yeah. And it varies. I mean, sometimes people are kind of right in the beginning. Other times it's like, wow, I've been doing this for years and I've really tried to think it wasn't a problem, but now I'm here and like, I really recognize that I can't do it on my own.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So you walk beside people and help guide them toward resources and give them tools and things like that. That's amazing. That's really great. How would people get a hold of you if they wanted to contact you?
Probably the best way is just to email me. Email and get in touch. I don't really have a lot going on social media at this point.
Okay.
I know it's like maybe something I should be doing, but
it's a big black hole. You just fall into it and you never get back out. So you're probably just fine.
Yeah. So probably just, email and, we can chat about options and what that looks like.
Okay. And I'll put your email in the notes. That's fine. Is there anything you'd like to share about fentanyl or about anything else that I didn't already ask you about?
I think the one thing that's come up a couple of times for me as we've been talking is thinking about overdose, is that with the exception of times when somebody maybe commits suicide and does it on purpose, that this idea that all overdoses are accidental, right? And that came from like something I was reading even just last night, actually. And it's just, that overdoses are always accidental. When people are out there using, they're not trying to OD. They're not trying to kill themselves. You said this earlier. They're trying to feel better. They're trying to, do all the things that their use does for them.
Yeah.
And then it's the situation where they accidentally use too much, or whatever they used was laced with fentanyl and they didn't know it. Right. And all these fentanyl deaths that we're having, so much of it is people that had no idea.
Yeah.
Right. So just this recognition that it's always accidental and it's tragic. And it's preventable. There's things we can do and tools that we can put in people's hands. But it's so important that we keep talking about this and just keep being aware of it, because it is this reality. And I think there's so much shame, right? It's hard for people to talk about like, oh, I lost my brother, Heather lost her daughter. It's so hard for, people to talk about. And we have to talk about it because it's such a big reality in our lives these days.
It is. And we really here at Safe Home want to rid the world of shame. And it's so common, you hear people dying at a young age and you're like, did they kill themselves or was it a drug overdose? And everyone's very secretive. It's almost always like this mysterious, we don't know. We're not just talking about it. We're just not going to go there. But I think if more people can talk about it, I don't know what it would be wrong with talking about it more. I think that can only help. To bring all these things out into open. So I hope that this conversation has helped a lot of people. I know it has, to understand a little bit more about fentanyl, about the dangers, what people can do about it, and to realize that if you have a loved one or if you are involved with substances, it's not something to be ashamed of or to be put in a box over here for. It just means that somebody is hurting and they're trying to alleviate some pain. That's all. And they haven't found another way to do so yet. And so some compassion for those people that are in so much pain that fentanyl or heroin or whatever seems like a better option. It just deserves a lot of compassion. And what can we as a society do to make life a little bit better for people so they don't have to be drawn to these kind of extreme situations. So, thank you very much, Nicole, for being on and for sharing this important information with us. I really, really appreciate all that you shared.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been great.
Yeah, definitely. And please find Safe Home Podcast on social media. SafeHomeFamilies.com is our website, and you can find events on there. We have all sorts of events coming up. We have live streamings, films coming up, and we have a couple of book clubs. I have a group for adoptive parents, all sorts of stuff going on. So go check it out, SafeHomeFamilies.com. And last but not least, we invite you to join our Patreon by donating a few dollars a month so we can keep the podcast commercial free. And welcome to our very latest Patreon supporter, Stacy Smith. Thanks for joining us, Stacy, and thank you to all of our Patreon supporters and all of our listeners. Thank you so much. Please share this episode with somebody you know that might have somebody in their life that's using substances, or that might have a young teen that might not have any idea what all this is about fentanyl. Let's help educate our families around this Very important topic. Thank you very much. Nicole and I want you all to stay safe.